The year is 1929. The world is about to change in a single devastating week. Wall Street is on the brink of collapse, fortunes are about to vanish into thin air, and the roaring 20s are about to come to a sudden, brutal end. But behind the crash, behind the panic and the headlines, there's a man whose fingerprints are all over the catastrophe. A single banker who not only fueled the bubble that destroyed millions of lives, but also walked away from the wreckage almost completely untouched. This is the story of Charles E. Mitchell, the man they called Sunshine Charlie. He was the banker who helped create the illusion of endless wealth, who ignited the frenzy that led to the Great Depression, and who somehow escaped the ruins he helped build. The 1920s were a decade of illusions. America had just emerged from World War I, richer and more powerful than ever before. Cars were rolling off assembly lines, radios were filling homes with music and news, and gleaming skyscrapers were touching the sky. The stock market wasn't just booming, it was glowing. Newspapers declared a new era of prosperity, and ordinary people believed the future could only go up. And no one sold that dream better than Charles Mitchell. Mitchell wasn't your typical Wall Street villain. He was charming, handsome, and relentlessly optimistic. As the head of National City Bank, the biggest bank in America, he preached one simple revolutionary message. Everyone should invest, not just the wealthy elite, but the middle class, the secretaries, the factory workers. He transformed banking into a mass market enterprise. Under his leadership, National City launched something radical, a securities sales department. This was a dedicated team whose entire job was to sell stocks and bonds directly to ordinary Americans. It was banking meets modern advertising. Glossy brochures flooded the country, promising easy profits, safe returns, and a golden ticket to join the new American dream. Mitchell had tapped into the one thing that every financial bubble in history relies on, belief. And in the 1920s, belief was in unlimited supply. At the heart of this new financial system was something deceptively simple, leverage. Investors didn't need the full price to buy a stock. They could buy on margin, borrowing up to 90% of the cost from banks or brokers. Mitchell's bank was one of the biggest lenders of this margin money. He pumped billions of dollars into the market, knowing that as long as prices kept rising, everyone would make money, especially him. By 1928, stock prices had become completely unhinged from reality. Companies with no profits were trading at impossible valuations. Newspapers were filled with daily success stories. Waiters who became millionaires overnight, secretaries retiring at 25, small investors buying brand new cars with their stock winnings. It felt like a financial utopia. Until it wasn't. Behind the scenes, the cracks were already starting to form. Interest rates began to rise. Corporate profits slowed down. But Mitchell refused to believe the music could ever stop. When the Federal Reserve tried to cool the overheating bubble by tightening credit, Mitchell essentially declared war. At a tense meeting in 1929, when the Fed urged banks to curb their margin lending, Mitchell famously stood up and said, "We will lend on stocks to the limit." And he meant it. That single defiant statement became the spark that kept the fire burning for just a few more months. Then, in October 1929, reality came crashing back. It began with a whisper, a few large, savvy investors quietly selling off their shares. Then, the whisper turned into a roar. Panic spread like wildfire. On October 24th, a day that would forever be known as Black Thursday, the market plunged. Terrified crowds gathered outside the New York Stock Exchange. Phones rang off the hook. Brokers screamed as a tidal wave of sell orders flooded in. By the end of the week, the illusion of eternal prosperity was shattered. By mid-November, over $30 billion in wealth had simply evaporated, an amount greater than the entire U.S. budget at the time. Yet, even as the world crumbled around him, Mitchell didn't panic. He issued public statements insisting the economy was fundamentally sound. In a desperate attempt to restore faith, National City Bank even started buying its own stock to prop up its price. But it was a futile gesture. The damage was irreversible. The Roaring Twenties had ended in a deafening silence. As the Great Depression deepened, the truth about Wall Street's recklessness began to surface. Investigations revealed that Mitchell's bank had lent money with wild abandon. It had sold junk securities to small, unsuspecting investors while deliberately concealing the risks. It had fueled the speculative bubble with mountains of borrowed money. And when the crash came, it was the ordinary people who lost everything. In 1933, the U.S. Senate launched an investigation known as the Pecora hearings to uncover what had really happened. These hearings exposed a world of corruption, conflicts of interest, and outright deception at the highest levels of American banking. And standing at the center of it all was Charles Mitchell. He was grilled by Ferdinand Pecora, a fearless prosecutor who refused to be intimidated. Under intense questioning, Mitchell admitted that his bank had aggressively sold risky securities to the public. He even confessed that he had personally avoided paying income tax by manipulating his own stock transactions. The newspapers exploded with outrage. Mitchell, the man who had once embodied the optimism of the 1920s, was now the public face of financial greed and corruption. And yet, somehow, he got away with it. Despite clear evidence of tax evasion and market manipulation, Mitchell was never convicted of any serious crime. He paid a relatively small fine, resigned from National City, and retreated quietly from public life. Incredibly, he continued to live comfortably. The very system that he had helped build, a system that had destroyed millions of lives, allowed him to walk free. He would later rebuild a portion of his fortune and even return to business in the 1940s. His public reputation was ruined, but he avoided prison, a fate not shared by the countless investors whose life savings he had helped wipe out. His story reveals one of history's most uncomfortable truths. When financial empires collapse, it's rarely the architects who suffer the most. The crash of 1929 wasn't just an economic event, it was a moral reckoning. It shattered the myth that markets can regulate themselves, that blind optimism can replace responsible oversight, and that trust can exist without transparency. In response, the U.S. government enacted sweeping reforms. The Glass-Steagall Act of 1933 was passed, creating a firewall between commercial and investment banking, a direct response to Mitchell's business model. The Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, was born to police the markets and protect investors. For a generation, the excesses of the 1920s became a powerful warning, a deep scar etched into the American psyche. But as the decades passed, the memory began to fade. By the late 20th century, deregulation was back in vogue. Banks once again started to blur the line between safe deposits and risky speculation. Credit flowed easily, risk was downplayed, and new, complex financial instruments created a brand new illusion of safety. Then, in 2008, the illusion shattered again. Different century, same story. The names had changed. Lehman Brothers instead of National City, subprime mortgages instead of margin loans, but the underlying psychology was identical. Greed disguised as innovation, optimism without restraint. And once again, the architects of the crisis largely walked away from the devastation they caused. It's tempting to think that history repeats itself by accident, but it doesn't. It repeats because we forget. Charles Mitchell wasn't necessarily evil in a cartoonish sense. He likely believed he was democratizing finance, bringing Wall Street to the masses. But belief without responsibility is a dangerous thing. His own optimism blinded him to the corrupting influence he had on the system. He mistook rising prices for real progress and a feeling of confidence for genuine stability. When the markets finally collapsed, his story became a mirror for our own modern age, a chilling warning that behind every economic boom lies the same fundamental human flaw, the illusion that we can somehow separate risk from consequence. Charles Mitchell's life ended quietly in 1955. By then, he was largely a forgotten figure, a relic of a bygone era. But his legacy continues to shape our world today. The financial system we live in, the regulations that protect us, the watchdogs that guard the markets, and even the skepticism that colors every economic boom, all trace their origins back to his spectacular rise and fall. The Great Depression wasn't caused by one man alone, but few individuals symbolized its reckless spirit more perfectly than Sunshine Charlie. Mitchell, the ultimate salesman of dreams who sold America its own destruction, and then cashed out just before the dream collapsed. When we look at our world today, at speculative manias, tech bubbles, meme stocks, and cryptocurrencies, it's easy to laugh at the past. But in reality, we are just looking in a mirror. Every generation has its own Sunshine Charlie, a charismatic figure promising wealth without risk, growth without limits, and a future that can only go up. But every illusion sooner or later ends the same way, with disbelief. And when that disbelief arrives, the crowd always turns to find someone to blame. In 1929, that man was Charles Mitchell. He built the machine, he sold the dream, and when the music stopped, he just walked away, smiling. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as we did, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the events that shaped our world. We'll see you in the next one.